when you have 5 minutes left and you have 30 minutes.
Perfect.
Feel free to begin.
Perfect. So I guess to start, how are you both? How are you coping with the global pandemic as it is?
Well, I mean, I think we're trying to stay optimistic and positive.
Yeah, and sane and all of those things. We're kind of getting back into creativity mode, writing something new. So that's been a nice distraction from everything outside.
Yeah, I feel like creativity is the only thing that's keeping us sane during these times, right? Yeah. Well, let's get into Violation so that I don't take up too much of your time. I just want to start by saying I absolutely loved the film. Like, I watched it again today and I was blown away by it. I'm still trying to write my review. It is a powerful film, to say the very least. How did you guys first come up with the concept for Violation?
Thank you so much. That's really lovely to hear.
Yeah, so we met at the TIFF Talent Lab in 2015. And at the time, we were both just making our own films, but we were, I think, looking for a collaborator. And we started making these short films together. And we noticed really early on in our friendship that we had a very similar kind of shared history in past. So we both have suffered from abuse and trauma.
And we weren't really open. We hadn't really opened up a lot about it at the time. So I think we were sort of testing the waters and starting to talk about these things that had happened and reconcile what had happened to us and get used to it, really.
Yeah, and this was all around, funny enough, the Me Too movement. Like, that's when we kind of started exploring abuse and trauma in our work. And I think it was through making some shorts and then us feeling more comfortable coming forward with our own stories that we just felt like this was the right time to kind of really, it's the culmination of everything we've been thinking and feeling, to kind of explore it with Violation. And for us, it was, at its core, it was about trying to capture the kind of visceral experience for the audience of post-traumatic stress and residual trauma from this one woman's perspective, and to really try to capture the emotional, psychological unraveling of revenge and the toll it takes on someone's morality. We're just so used to seeing within the revenge genre this idea of wish fulfillment, this cathartic, emotional, resonant celebration of revenge. And it's something, while we love those movies, there's something inherently problematic about this notion that the only way a person who suffers from trauma can be whole again is by violently murdering their abuser, and as some kind of healing coping mechanism. And we just don't subscribe to that. And that was kind of like the underpinning of how we wanted to structure and think about this movie. It's really kind of an anti-revenge film in many ways. We wanted to scare you as an audience into not wanting to seek revenge because you can see the brutality of it and the toll it takes.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I'm personally someone that, I watch a lot of extreme films. I watch a lot of rape revenge films. So I was drawn to this film because obviously everything I'd heard was, oh, this is a rape revenge film. So I was like, oh, okay. And then when I went into it, I was like, wow, this is so different to all of the other films that are on the table. But I think actually, it provides a really refreshing perspective on that kind of subgenre, and as you mentioned there, it is exceptionally brutal and it's very, very extreme in terms of the violence and the revenge that's in there. Did you take any particular inspiration when it came to those scenes? Were there any kind of films that really gave you that perspective on more of the extreme violence?
I think what was most important for us was to keep it incredibly grounded. From the moment that we started talking about the idea, it was always completely within the realms of naturalism. We didn't want it to feel heightened at all. We didn't want it to feel like kind of John Wick style revenge, where it's really, we wanted it to feel like you're almost watching a documentary. It's so naturalistic.
And we didn't want to sensationalize the violence either. Within the horror genre, in that space, we're used to seeing close-ups of gore and this idea of torture porn, where we sensationalize and romanticize, the horrors of it all. But in fact, we feel like it desensitizes us from it. And
it also doesn't leave a lot of room in the real world for an actual way to cope with trauma. It's really satisfying to watch, and as people who have gone through trauma, we've loved to watch those types of films, because it's great to watch someone get completely gruesome, gory, over the top revenge, but left a little bit thinking at the end, well, what am I supposed to do?
It was about capturing the idea of the almost like the trauma of revenge, really. Like how revenge itself, the act of revenge, can be as traumatizing as the abuse that occurs to her. And when I think of Catherine Breillat's film Fat Girl, or the moment in Cachet, where you're just sort of stunned by the brutality of a single moment, and it's unexpected, and because of how those filmmakers lingered in wide shots, it really makes you think you're there, and it puts you in the minds of these characters in a way that really provokes a kind of horror, and it's just truly disturbing to look at. And I think trying to capture that feeling for an audience was really vital in a genre, in a space where most audiences have seen everything. It's hard to kind of make them feel that horror that Miriam is feeling in that moment. And at the same time, it was about humanizing her, right? She's doing this horrific thing. How can we find something to really show you that she's repulsed and disgusted by her own actions, that she's not like a serial killer?
It was important for us not to kind of zoom in on and just focus on the gore, but to see her physicality during these moments, what this revenge is doing to her body and to her psychology.
And because it's in that wide, you see the juxtaposition of both their bodies at the exact same time, that we were really fascinated by that duality.
Yeah, I think it comes through so well. I mean, the scene, where Miriam's strangling Dylan, and afterwards she just kind of falls to the floor and screams. I mean, one of my favorite films is I Spit on Your Grave, and I was like, it was the complete opposite feeling of that film. I was going, oh gosh, that's awful, that's a horrible thing to do. Whereas I guess if you watch some of those other films, like you guys said, you're kind of cheering, going, yeah, that's awesome, she got her payback. Whereas in Violation, you don't feel that at all for Miriam. And obviously, Madeleine, you act as Miriam in this. How was it? How was the process with you in front of the camera, and also yourself, Dusty, behind the camera? What was kind of the dynamics between that?
It was tough, to say the least. I think just because of the sheer amount of work that meant both of us had to do. It was double the amount of work than we would do if we were both just behind the camera. But I think it was the right decision, because we knew that I would push myself to the edge of my ability as an actor, and to the emotional edge as well. It was really important for me to tell this story, and I think that comes through in the performance, that the personal nature of it definitely does come through.
Our collaborations in the past, sometimes Madeleine acts in them, sometimes we're both just behind the camera. And whenever Madeleine's in front of the camera and we have this collaboration, it's really vital that I feel like an additional sense of responsibility to make sure that I'm adhering to our shared vision of something, and making sure that both of our ideas are being represented constantly throughout the process of making the film. And at the same time, I think it's requires a lot of trust on set, because Madeleine can't direct in the moment when she's on camera, simply because then her performance will be false and she'll become self-conscious. So it requires a real trust, but from both of us, where we're both giving up freedoms and trusting that we're going to be there for each other to push each other to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, it's interesting because the directing, when I'm in a scene, becomes much more about a feeling rather than, because I'm obviously not watching the monitor. I'm not seeing what the shot looks like, but I can still feel the energy of the scene, and I can feel what I'm getting from the other actor, what I'm giving. So I have a sense of what I want, but and then I'll tell Dusty, and we'll decide together how to kind of direct the next take and move forward with it.
And I should also add, like, we do an insane amount of prep when Madeleine's acting in the film. So everything is shot listed in storyboard, and there's floor plans, and like we've endlessly have spoken about everything about this movie, so that there's no real surprises, but there are these discoveries that happen on set, and it's because there's this space for exploration. Yeah,
there was a moment actually in the scene where, near the end of the film, where my character has the fight with the Bosnian couple.
Yes.
We completely had a plan for how we were going to shoot that, with all these different angles and close-ups, and on the day we started shooting and realized that it would be most effective just in one take. So we very quickly just decided, okay, scrap all of the other shots we had. We're just going to shoot the whole day, just repeating this one take over and over again.
15 takes, in the rain. Just one shot.
Yeah.
Intense. But it definitely comes through, kind of, what you were talking about is that feeling and that emotion throughout the film. I think you can absolutely see on screen how much of a personal kind of film this is, which I think makes a big difference, especially when tackling such a tough topic that you do in this. And obviously the film, it approaches rape, which is a taboo subject. It's not easy to talk about at all. Did you find that you both were able to bring perhaps slightly different perspectives, obviously a woman's perspective versus a man's perspective? Because I think for me, in Violation, it was so interesting to see the way that Miriam has this experience versus what Dylan has this experience as. And I'm wondering whether either of you kind of, brought different perspectives to it in a way.
I think in all of our collaborations, we're not consciously thinking about our gender as an identifier of who we are, but innately, I can only ever think as a man, that's who I am. Madeleine can only think as a woman. And so that inevitably it becomes imbued in the work that we do. And because our collaborations are about an alignment and vision, we're constantly challenging each other and pushing and pulling until we find this kind of unity in our ideas. So hopefully that unity is a forging of both of these unique perspectives. As it comes to specifically the rape and the sexual assault, I don't think that was gendered specific in any way, simply because we're both looking at it from the perspective of people who have suffered abuse. We're uniquely different, so there's definitely our own experiences. It was really important for me to capture the idea of being unconscious when someone is being abused.
And for me it was the familial, like the family issue. What happens when that abuser is somebody very close to you, that you have this love for?
But when it comes to kind of the perspective of Dylan, the brother-in-law, I think both of us were challenged by Jesse Levercombe, because he, as the actor, had to get inside the head of this character and needed to rationalize why this person did what they did. And so it was a challenge for both of us to think through why would this person do this, and how, and not judge them in the process, so that you can try to not vindicate them in any way, but try to make them human, see that this is a human person who's done a monstrous thing. Because when we start talking about these acts of violence and abuse, it's really easy to make someone a monster and an evil villain, and then you strip it of its humanity. And then it becomes really intangible to really relate to or talk about in any kind of meaningful way, because real people do these monstrosities, right? So it's important to really see his perspective only in that it makes it far more challenging to deal with.
And how we've thought a lot about the idea of people taking accountability for the actions that they do. So people who are perpetrators of sexual violence taking accountability. If we only ever see them as these evil villains in film and television, then how is there ever going to be room for those people to work through what they've done and to acknowledge what they did?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, when I watched the film, I guess I almost had, and I think this is where, you know, kind of it comes into play, where you're talking about humanizing the characters and not presenting, you know, someone like Dylan as a villain. And I think almost, you know, there's elements to Miriam as well that you could supposedly say is villainous in a way, you know, towards the end. And I think for me, that almost presented a kind of an internal conflict of, yes, you know, this rape has happened, this trauma has happened. However, when you get into the second kind of half of the film, I was like, you know, you obviously have the wolf and the rabbit imagery in there, which I absolutely adore. And I started to question, I was like, well, who is the wolf now and who is the rabbit? Could it be seen as both parties? And do you guys think that perhaps there's room there to even read the film as quite open in terms of, you know, who is the trustworthy narrator of this story? Do you think there's maybe potential for a conflict in the viewer of how do I view this storyline?
Yeah, I think the what we wanted to be really clear is that there is a rape that occurs, and what happens to her is an assault. That we didn't want to be ambiguous, but absolutely we wanted the audience to start to question who is the wolf, because of the way that she reacts and the way that we see she's reacted in the past with her sister as well. That she has this kind of savior complex where she goes in all guns blazing and doesn't really think about. It's very righteous. She doesn't think about the complexities and the nuances.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to forget that regular people who are multifaceted and flawed, who are, like in the film, medium shitty, are abused. And it doesn't make it any less wrong that they're abused just because they're not this perfect person, which you're often, that's how a victim is often portrayed. We really wanted to show that this type of abuse can happen to anyone, and it doesn't matter if you're a great person or a terrible person. It's wrong, it's terrible, and there are these horrific consequences nonetheless. And I think for us, it was really about trying to challenge the way you traditionally see this subgenre in a way that hopefully forces you to think more deeply about your own biases. And I think that that's what the film does, is that it will reveal inherently an audience's bias. It's funny, we'll meet some men who really can understand Miriam, but a lot of men can't. And a lot of it is really revealing to us the kind of ingrained sexism that exists, and also the lack of empathy toward women who are anti-heroes. You know, we're used to seeing women as being either morally complete and perfect or pure evil, and there's not a lot of room for these morally complex female anti-heroes.
Yeah, we also encounter people who do think there is a lot of ambiguity in what happens, and who don't understand that Miriam has been assaulted, and
that's shocking. That's upsetting and shocking, and in a way that's the whole point of the movie, right? If it reveals and exposes an audience's inability to know what is consent, then the film is doing its job in provoking a conversation about a topic that people are squeamish about and don't want to have.
Absolutely. And I think for me, that was my biggest takeaway was, you know, I watched it at first and I came away with that question on who is the wolf, but then I was like, it's still essentially is always Dylan. Yes, okay, what Miriam did was perhaps not the right response, but you know, like you said, that rape scene, when I watched it again today, it brings tears to my eyes. It, you know, there's no denying that is a rape scene, regardless of the narrative around it or the actions that are taken afterwards that maybe do feel, you know, quite conflicting. And I think, you know, you guys have done so well at opening up a conversation and getting people to, you know, kind of go, okay, let's actually look at this in maybe a more realistic way. And another thing in there that I found really interesting was the relationships in general between all of them. What would you, I know you both said it's like quite personal, what would you kind of say about it representing our relationships with husbands and partners and also siblings as well?
I mean, yeah, so we both have siblings. I have sisters and brothers, and you have a brother and a sister. And so a lot of it was kind of a mash of our own experiences. I think one thing that was really important to us is that when you grow up with siblings, you get used to them as people when you're kids together. And you have this idea of who they are. From childhood that's maybe no longer relevant when you're adults, but you still will always see them in that way, and you'll always judge them a bit more harshly than other people would, because you have this preconceived notion of who they are.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to husbands and wives and friendships, there's unspoken power dynamics that intrinsically exist within those structures, and we were really fascinated by the abuse of those powers, and we see them in a bunch of different ways in the film. And, you know, for example, we see a moment where right shortly after the rape, Miriam assaults her husband, and that's another thing that is not really being talked about so much. But this idea that, yeah, you know, assaults can occur within marriages, and this idea that there is a constant struggle of power and how power can be abused in those situations, I think is really important to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I actually, when on revisiting the film, I think on the first watch, I didn't really, I think after such a powerful scene, it was almost, I kind of overlooked the scene between Miriam and Caleb. And when I went back to it today, I was like, that's, you know, it's almost kind of, it's like a comparison, isn't it? Yeah. You know, you almost don't think of that as an assault because you're going, oh, well, it's just her going back to her husband. And, you know, but actually he says no, he pushes her away, he becomes very upset, which I think it's great that you put that in there as something to actually, you know, digest and go, it's not just males that, you know, are sexually violent towards women. It can be the other way around, and it can happen in a supposedly loving marriage, regardless of the effects there. And I think we've probably only got about a few minutes left. So I'd just like to, I wonder, was there any particular directors you took any influence from? Because for me, I really got this sense of kind of Lars von Trier, you know, with The Wolf and The Woods, and also the soundtrack is stunning. I mean, I loved the soundtrack. It brought shivers to me. Were there any kind of particular directors that really gave you a lot of influence when you were creating Violation?
I mean, Lars von Trier has always been a big influence on me personally. I not so much on Dusty. I always deeply relate to his characters, especially his female characters.
I think what I'm smiling just because whenever we watch a Lars von Trier film, we'll have competing views, and we're both very
which is what makes our collaboration dynamic.
Yeah, I don't see Lars von Trier in the movie at all, but people see it. No, I think where there's a symbiosis is, you know, Haneke for sure. Like, we've spoken a lot about him. There's a certain who am I thinking? There's a certain grounded realism that we're really trying to kind of portray. And
I think Andrea Arnold has definitely been an influence on all of our.
And Lynn Ramsey as well. There's just the use of violence to really shake the core of who you are, but also trying to you know, put you in a space and try to capture a feeling that's very specific to what this one character is feeling. I think that experience is really the most important thing. But yeah, I think there's so many different filmmakers that we're influenced by, sometimes consciously, unconsciously. There's sometimes someone will reference something and we haven't either seen the film or we'll look back and go, oh yeah, I guess there's shades of that in there and we didn't even realize. But I think ultimately, like, we just love when filmmakers, you know, challenge us. And I think what excites us about going to see a movie is having a new experience and empathizing with characters in a new way.
And possibly having your opinion changed.
Or challenged,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I think, you know, I think you guys have done, like I said, I think you guys have done an incredible job at doing that with Violation. And yeah, I mean, I only rewatched it today, but I'm very looking forward to watching it again. I might need to maybe take a breather. You know, it's quite a gut punch of a film. It doesn't really, you know, my partner said to me, when, oh, you didn't show me that one. I was like, you're not going to like that one. I was like, it's not the kind of thing I'm going to show you. But, you know, I think it's absolutely a film that I think, you know, anyone that, especially people that perhaps like rape revenge films, I think it's, you know, as you guys said, it's a film that challenges that perspective. So I guess thank you for bringing something different to the genre. Yeah, thank you for the film. I mean, it's personally now one of it's up there for me, absolutely up there. So yeah, I just want to thank you for the film.
Thanks for watching it more than once.
Thank you so much for watching.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, that is all of my questions. I'm sure you guys have got a absolutely back-to-back day answering all of the same things. So yeah, I'm going to let you get back to the rest of your day. Hopefully have a break. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.